A 9-year-old girl went to bed on a Friday night in a town of 150 people where nothing bad ever happened. By the next morning, she was gone. Her stepfather told police she had woken him in the middle of the night and asked to sleep at a friend's house. He said he let her go without asking which friend, without asking the friend's name, without a second thought. The police were skeptical. The community was terrified. The FBI joined the search. And for 7 days, every lead pointed toward one man. They were looking in the wrong direction the entire time. And the truth, when it finally came, at a bridge a few miles outside of town from a man who raised his hands and said, "After what I tell you, you'll have to handcuff me," was something no one in that investigation had come close to predicting. Rowan Ford was born on April 11th, 1998, in San Diego, California. After her parents divorced, her mother Colleen moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri, a community so small that most people knew every family by name. Colleen eventually remarried. Her husband David became Rowan's stepfather. Between Colleen's children from her previous relationship and their shared daughter, Rowan grew up in a household of 5 siblings, 2 sisters and 2 brothers. She was close to all of them. She spent most of her free time outside. She rode her bike around town. She swam when she could. She liked to draw. At Sunday school, she didn't just attend. She stayed afterward to help younger children who were struggling with their lessons. She was 9 years old. She was in the 4th grade. She was the kind of child that small communities build themselves around. In November of 2007, Rowan Ford was taken from her bedroom while she slept. Rowan's mother Colleen worked nights at a local store. Her stepfather David spent most of his days working the family farm. The arrangement meant Rowan was sometimes alone during the transitions, after her mother left and before David came back. It had made her independent in the way children of working parents often are. On the evening of November 2nd, 2007, Colleen left for her night shift. David had not yet returned from the farm. Rowan was home alone for a period of time, something that happened regularly enough that no one thought much of it. Around 9 a.m. the following morning, Colleen came home from her shift and went to check on Rowan. The bed was empty. She found David and asked him where Rowan was. He told her that Rowan had woken him up in the night and asked if she could go to a friend's house for a sleepover. He said he told her yes. He said he didn't ask which friend because the town was so small and he wasn't worried. Colleen immediately began calling every one of Rowan's friends. Stella had only a handful of streets. It didn't take long to contact everyone. Not one of them had seen Rowan. Not one of them had hosted her. She searched the entire town. Nothing. When she returned home and told David that Rowan was nowhere, he told her not to worry. She would turn up. Colleen waited. Hours passed. She picked up the phone and called 911 herself. Before this investigation gets deeper, if you want cases like Rowan's covered with the full weight they deserve, subscribe to Unresolved Years Mysteries now. This channel stays with these stories all the way to the truth. The local sheriff organized the response immediately. He came to the house and spoke with David, who was the last confirmed person to have seen Rowan before she vanished. David's account of the previous evening. He had been working on the farm with a man named Christopher. A mutual friend named Nathan stopped by. The 3 of them decided to go to David's house for drinks and a game of pool. They stopped at a store, bought alcohol, and spent several hours at the house. Later in the night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home to the neighboring town where he had a trailer. David joined them to continue the evening. Before leaving the house, David said he checked on Rowan. She was asleep in her room. He left with his friends. At Christopher's trailer, they continued drinking for about an hour. David decided to head home, and Nathan drove him back, taking back roads rather than the highway, because Nathan had been drinking and didn't want to encounter police. Nathan dropped David off and drove home. David went to bed. Sometime later, he said Rowan woke him and asked to go to a friend's house. He said yes and went back to sleep. Investigators found this story difficult to accept on its face. A 9-year-old girl doesn't wake her stepfather in the middle of the night to ask permission to walk to a friend's house, and a parent doesn't agree without asking whose house or confirming by phone. The sheriff considered David a person of interest, but had nothing yet to establish involvement. The community of Stella, approximately 150 residents, mobilized almost immediately. Everyone knew Rowan's family. People who had always let their children play freely in this quiet place were now searching side streets and nearby fields in the dark. The first day produced nothing. On November 4th, police traveled to the neighboring town to speak with Christopher. He confirmed the same sequence of events David had described. He added one detail. David hadn't contacted him since that evening, and he had only just learned about Rowan's disappearance. The search continued. More volunteers joined. The FBI arrived on the morning of November 5th and brought federal investigative resources to bear. Investigators focused increasingly on David. When questioned again, his account shifted. Timelines changed. A detail he had left out emerged. On the night Rowan disappeared, he had borrowed his mother's car, something he had not initially disclosed. Police seized both that vehicle and his own pickup truck. Laboratory examination of both found nothing. When Christopher was brought in again, he passed a polygraph test. He showed no signs of deception on the instrument. He was released. That same afternoon, something unexpected happened. Sheriff Clark, who led a department in the nearby town of Witten and had known Christopher since the man was a child, was driving when Christopher waved him over. Clark had known Christopher for 17 years. He had been close to Christopher's foster parents. Christopher had come to him during difficult moments throughout his life, including the death of his mother. There was a level of trust between them that was different from the standard police-informant relationship. Clark stopped. They talked about the investigation, and something in Christopher's manner during that conversation made Clark's instincts fire. He couldn't name what was wrong, but Christopher was behaving strangely. He seemed to be carrying something he wasn't releasing. Clark contacted the FBI and shared his assessment. Investigators theorized that Christopher might be protecting David, that David had asked him to confirm the story with certain details adjusted, and Christopher now feared that telling the truth would implicate him as an accomplice. That evening, Christopher appeared at Colleen's home to ask about the search. FBI agents were already there to speak with her. When Christopher arrived, they took the opportunity to question him again. He repeated the original account, but this time he said something new. He said he could not rule out David's involvement, and that he wanted to help uncover the truth, whatever it turned out to be. He even offered to wear a wire and approach David directly to try to draw out a confession. Investigators declined the wire approach for now. Instead, they asked Christopher if he had any thoughts about where David might have hidden a body. He provided several locations. The next morning, those locations were searched. Nothing was found. Investigators continued to bring David in for questioning. He continued to deny everything. A search of his home produced nothing. Christopher visited the sheriff's department that same morning looking for Clark, who wasn't there. He left word that he needed to speak with him urgently. Clark spent hours tracking him down before Christopher finally called him directly. Christopher was agitated. He said he thought he was being followed by a gray car and was worried about his safety, that once Rowan's body was found, people might try to hold him responsible for something he hadn't done. Clark met him in person and brought him to the station. At the station, Christopher became increasingly emotional. He began crying. He told Clark that he had always loved Rowan, that when he had been living at David's house, a period of several months while he didn't have housing of his own, he had become close to all the children there. They had started calling him Uncle Christopher. Clark could feel it. Christopher was almost there. He was on the edge of saying whatever he had been carrying. And then someone arrived at the station. Clark's attention shifted for a moment. When he turned back, Christopher was gone. Stay with this, because 7 days into the search, everything changes at once. Rowan is found. And what happens next at a small bridge outside of town is one of the most extraordinary confessions you will hear in any true crime case. Subscribe to Unresolved Years Mysteries so you're here for every development we cover. On November 9th, 2007, 7 days after Rowan's disappearance, a search team reached a remote area near a town called Powell, approximately 10 miles from Stella. In a clearing among fields and trees, they found a large pit in the ground. Inside, concealed under layers of leaves and debris, was Rowan Ford's body. She had no clothing below the waist except for a single sock. Medical examination determined she had been strangled and sexually assaulted. She was 9 years old. The FBI contacted Sheriff Clark immediately and asked him to find Christopher. The timing was critical. They believed that news of Rowan's body being discovered might prompt Christopher to finally tell the truth. Clark went to every location where Christopher might be. He wasn't at any of them. Then Christopher called the sheriff's personal phone. His voice was shaking. He said he had heard about Rowan's body and had been driving around trying to process it. He said he noticed what he thought was a gray car following him and was afraid. He asked if he was under surveillance. Clark told him he knew nothing about any surveillance. He asked Christopher to meet him in person. When they met, Christopher was visibly distressed. He said he was afraid that with Rowan's body found, people would target him for revenge. Clark took him back to the station. Inside, Christopher said he didn't want to talk there. Too many people. He asked if they could go somewhere quieter. He suggested a small bridge a few miles outside of town. Clark agreed. They drove out together. They parked and got out of the bridge. Christopher raised his hands. He said, "You should handcuff me." Clark told him that wasn't necessary. Christopher said, "After what I tell you, you'll have to." He began to speak. He started with the same version of that evening he had told everyone. He and Nathan and David drinking at the trailer. David and Nathan leaving to head home. All of it the same. Then he described what happened next. After his friends left, he got in his own car and drove, not on the back roads, but straight down the main highway directly to David's house. He knew his friends would take much longer on the back roads. He had a window. He entered Rowan's room. He picked her up carefully, carrying her to his car in a way that kept her from waking. He drove her back to his trailer. She woke up when he assaulted her. She tried to resist. She couldn't. He kept the lights off. He didn't speak. He didn't want her to recognize him. When it was over, he intended to take her back to her bedroom before morning. He carried her outside toward the car. The moon was bright that night. She saw his face. He panicked. He grabbed a rope. He strangled her. When she was gone, he put her body in the car and drove. He thought about the bridge, the one where he was standing right now with Sheriff Clark. But he decided the body would be found too quickly. He kept driving. He remembered the pit near Powell. He drove there and placed her inside, covering her as best he could with branches and debris. They fell back in. The pit was too large. He drove back to the trailer. There was blood on his clothes and on the mattress. He collected everything, her clothing, her underwear, the rope, and put it all in a barrel. He planned to burn it, but realized the smoke and fire would draw attention. He dragged the barrel into the shed and burned it there in the dark. Then he waited to see what happened next. Clark stood at that bridge and took in what he was hearing. For the entire week of this investigation, he had believed the same thing everyone else believed, that David was hiding something, that the stepfather had done this. Christopher had been in the background, the cooperative witness, the grieving family friend. He had been the killer the whole time. Christopher agreed to go back to the station voluntarily. Clark did not handcuff him. When they arrived, Christopher repeated the full confession to FBI agents. He signed voluntary consent forms to search his trailer and vehicle. He was arrested. He added one thing at the end, that he had cried all the following day, that he regretted what he had done. With Christopher in custody, investigators immediately went to David and told him what his friend had confessed. And then David said something that stunned them. He changed his story completely. He said that when he came home that night and found Rowan's room empty, he realized Christopher might have taken her. He said he drove to Christopher's trailer. He entered. He saw Rowan there. And instead of helping her, he said he also assaulted her. He said he then helped Christopher kill her and dispose of the body. He said something had switched off in his brain, and he hadn't remembered the details until now. Investigators went back to Christopher and confronted him with David's account. Christopher said his friend was not involved, that everything had happened exactly the way he had described at the bridge. Medical and forensic evidence aligned with Christopher's account. The rope used for strangulation, a thin rope, matched what Christopher described. Hair consistent with Rowan's was found in his car. Ashes in the barrel in the shed were consistent with what he said he had burned. David's confession had introduced a serious legal complication. If the prosecution pursued murder charges against David, it would require introducing his account into the legal record, and his account directly contradicted Christopher's established confession, potentially creating grounds to challenge Christopher's conviction. There is no physical DNA evidence linking David to the assault or the killing. Prosecutors faced a decision they described as genuinely agonizing. To avoid the risk of Christopher's conviction being overturned, charges against David were reduced significantly. He pleaded guilty to child endangerment and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 11 years, with a minimum of 5 to be served. The response from Rowan's community and from the broader public was outrage. If David was present and participated, the sentence bore no relationship to the crime. But the legal reality was what it was. In 2012, 5 years after Rowan's murder, Christopher was sentenced to death following trial. He attempted to have his confession excluded from evidence, arguing he hadn't understood his rights. The judge rejected that motion. His attorneys presented arguments about a difficult childhood and developmental challenges. The court weighed them. The sentence stood. He has appealed. The appeals have been denied. He remains on death row. Given the length of time that typically separates death sentences from executions in the American system, there is no certainty about when or whether that sentence will be carried out. David was released after serving the minimum of his sentence. Whether he was present in that trailer that night, whether Christopher's insistence that David was uninvolved was the truth or a final act of loyalty or self-protection, has never been definitively resolved. No evidence placed him there. No evidence cleared him either. What is certain is that Rowan Ford was 9 years old, that she went to bed on a Friday night in a town where everyone knew her name, that she trusted the people around her the way children trust the adults they have always known. A man she called Uncle Christopher came to her room in the dark, carried her to his car while she slept, and killed her when the moonlight showed him her face. She was 9 years old. She liked to draw. She helped younger children at Sunday school. She rode her bike around a town of 150 people and felt completely safe. Rowan Ford deserves to be remembered as more than a name in a case file. She was a complete person with people who loved her in a community that was never the same after she was gone. If this episode gave you something, subscribe to Unresolved Years Mysteries and share it. Every person who knows her name carries it forward.